Hello, Air Warriors. Welcome to another great episode of Chevrons, a podcast for the Enlisted Force by the Enlisted Force. We're going to do something a bit unique today. This is the first episode of Chevrons where we have not one, not two, but three commissioned officers as part of our panel. You might ask yourselves, well, why no enlisted folks? This is, after all, an Enlisted Issues podcast. Well, you are absolutely correct. That is why the topic of today's episode is enlisted commissioning, the ins and outs of getting commissioned as an enlisted person. Each of our guests today are prior enlisted company grade officers who each made the jump from stripes to bars. If you are considering the same, this discussion might provide some valuable insight into how to prepare for this, the process itself, and what it looks like once you've made the transition. Let's get to know our panelists. Starting on my left, please give me your name, rank, job when you left the enlisted force, and your rank and job now, and a bit of background. What's your military story?
Sure. So I'm Captain Vincent Tripodi. I am currently the base civil engineer here at the 102nd. Formerly, I did 14 years as a prior enlisted. I was a crew chief on B-52 bombers when I was active duty. I was stationed in Minot, North Dakota. It wasn't so bad. And then I went from there to McGuire Air Force Base, where I worked on KC-10s. I transitioned into the reserves there, and then I also spent 3 or 4 years as a reservist. Then I transitioned to the National Guard, where I went to the 143rd. I was a crew chief on C-130J models. That's where I started going to college, and then I made my way out to Peoria, Illinois, as a crew chief on C-130H models, and then that's where I got my commission in civil engineering.
Wow, that's quite a history there. A lot of aircraft.
Yes,
One of my favorite aircraft, the B-52. I love the buff.
I have a lot of pieces of it.
Oh, wow. Well, hopefully that's a good thing. All right, Lieutenant.
Hello, my name is Colleen O'Hara. I'm a first lieutenant in the United States Space Force. I work at the 6th Space Warning Squadron at Cape Cod Space Force Station. There I am the chief of weapons and tactics, so we take what our radar does and we try and make tactics, techniques, and procedures to try and make us fight in today's war when the radar was built in the 70s. Before that, I was a POL troop, so I refueled airplanes. So I actually handed the hose over to Captain Tripodi and would refuel our airplanes. I did a few B-52s too, but we mostly refueled the KC-135 over there. Started in the Air National Guard, did ROTC at the same time, and then I commissioned into the Air Force as a space operations officer, and then afterwards, once the Space Force became a thing, I transitioned to commissioning into the Space Force.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic. Lieutenant Nancarrow.
Hey, good morning. So First Lieutenant Alan Nancarrow. So I commissioned in 2020. Prior to that, I enlisted in 2008 here into the 102nd Intelligence Wing. I've been security forces the entire time. So when I was enlisted, I worked everything from just your standard flight operations to where I ended up doing a large amount of electronic security. And then now I'm the operations officer, so I handle all of the operations and training for the squadron.
Excellent, excellent. And you enlisted in what year was it?
2008. And
when you left enlisted service, what rank were you?
I was a master sergeant when I left.
Cool.
Oh, wow. That's good. That's cool. I was a senior airman when I left, and I couldn't imagine going through all of the up to master sergeant and then making the transition.
It honestly, and we'll get into it a little bit later, I think, but it helped my transition quite a bit by having that experience. So
good OTS money.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, excellent. So the first question I've got for you folks is, and whoever wants to answer first, please feel free. When did you realize you wanted to pursue a commission? Was it right from the start, from your enlistment? Did you come to the conclusion over time?
Okay, so this is Captain Tripodi. I don't know if I have to introduce myself every time I
think we'll recognize your voice.
All right.
It's local.
Yeah. I actually have a different answer maybe than you guys. I didn't want to be an officer. I never sought it out. I was a crew chief. It was very fun. If you guys know aircraft maintenance is fun, yeah. And I'll leave it at that. And I was happy. I made the planes fly, and then I came in and I just hung out with my friends on deployments. We hung out with our friends. We made the planes fly. I really had no desire to be an officer. And then once my commander, when I got to Peoria, my commander was Colonel Carpenter, who's now General Carpenter, who's the A4. He was my squadron commander, and he found out that I had an engineering degree, which apparently in the Air Force is like being a unicorn. You don't, because you can't commission as an engineering officer without an engineering degree, a specific type of engineering degree, which I had. So I was changing a tire. It was in the middle of winter. I was dirty. I had grease on my face. My Gore-Tex was all black. And they came and they pulled me off the tire change. And they brought me in front. They brought me in a room full of like 306s and 305s, and they were just like, Tripodi, you want to be an officer? And I was like, okay, sure. And and then 6 months later, I was a second lieutenant reporting to Colonel Leach over at the Civil Engineering Squadron.
Wow, that's amazing. Almost a field promotion, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I was really back and forth. I was genuinely happy where I was at. I was a supervisor. I was a tech sergeant when I got out of commission, and I had been doing it for 14 years, so I was very comfortable. I was a technical expert, and I enjoyed it. And then I really had a hard time. I went into General Carpenter's office almost daily. Well, Colonel Carpenter, I guess, at the time. Mm-hmm. And I was just like, sir, I don't know if I should do this. And he got sick of it one day, and he like closed the door. And I won't swear on the podcast, but he was like, you want to get stuff done? That's what officers do. If you don't want to get stuff done, get out of my office. And that was kind of the whole
tough love kind of thing.
I was like, all right, I'll do it, I guess. So, and then that's mine. So it might be a little different. I didn't seek anything out, and so I'll let you guys talk to that. But
so I can go next if it's so kind of similar. I had no intention of commissioning. My plan for my enlisted career had always been that I wanted to be the security forces manager in security forces. That was always my goal. Continuing to kind of climb up the ladder, learn everything that I could from different things. And it wasn't until my now mentor, Colonel Lisa Hasey, kind of a similar story of, if you want to get stuff done, that's what officers do. I really wanted to kind of change the culture and change the organization, like my specific squadron, the 102nd. And she and I had a very, honest heart-to-heart conversation. And she was like, she's like, I have no doubts that one day you would make a great chief. She's like, but I think that you'd make an even better officer. And that you could have like a really big lasting effect on the unit. So she was like, if that's something you want to pursue, let me know and I will help you. If not, she's like, no harm, no foul. So it helped because I was already pursuing my bachelor's degree at the time. So I was already close to being done. So it was really kind of it was a quick pivot. And next thing I knew, I was like, oh, I'm in it now. I'm doing it. My degree's done, and now I'm studying for the AFOQT, and it seemed like it just happened super, super quickly. And another part of it that's funny is I started the process when I was a staff sergeant, became a tech sergeant, and then I ended up getting dates to NCOA, which is what ultimately let me become a master sergeant. But because I was already pursuing that commission, I really wasn't that interested in trying to go to NCOA. And I sought out some feedback from some other mentors and stuff and said, hey, is this even worth it? And they were like, absolutely. Like, getting that senior NCO experience, while becoming an officer is going to serve you, miles and miles down the road. And it absolutely has.
Excellent.
So yes, my story is very different from both of you. I originally joined the Air National Guard strictly to pay for school. I never thought the military would be a career for me whatsoever. My recruiter told me, free tuition to the school that you're going to if it's in state. Is that true for Massachusetts too? Okay, great. And so I was just going, and then I did one semester at school, and then the next semester I took some time off to go to basic training and tech school. And then when I got back, I was walking around campus one day and I saw someone else in a uniform, and I walked up to them and said, hey, I also wear a uniform. Why are you in this uniform? Your rank looks different than mine. And they had, cadet rank on them. And so they said, oh, I'm in ROTC. And I walked over to the building with them, and they said, this is how you get a commission. And I said, well, I got nothing going on today. I might as well try it out and see what happens. And so even joining and then going into ROTC, I just felt like everything was falling into place. And so I didn't have much enlisted time under my belt, only 6 months really when I decided I was going to pursue commissioning. And then I did the 4 years in school while serving as an enlisted member in the Air National Guard. So I was doing dual hat. I was both getting my enlisted time in and serving in ROTC, which I will say is definitely a good way to get your commission because my tuition was paid for with the Air Guard, and then my room and board was paid for with a scholarship for ROTC. So definitely a good way to snake the system, I think.
That's great. That's a very unique story. One of the topics that we talk about a lot on this program is mentorship. Did you all seek out a mentor who had done what you wanted to do? A former enlisted officer. Was there anyone who guided you through the process, either in the decision-making process or in the actual nuts and bolts work of the commissioning process?
I think, as far as I didn't seek out a mentor. I didn't even know that I was going to be an officer, and then one day I just showed up. As far as a mentor, after you start, I'm going to say I think it depends on your job. I've been my perspective as an Air Force officer is from civil engineering only, with an enlisted perspective of aircraft maintenance and an enlisted perspective of what an officer should be. And so once I became an officer, my commander at the time quit. She was a technician. She had enough. She got passed over for promotion a couple times, and she quit, and I was put in charge as a second lieutenant. And there's little help, and you have to, as an officer, you just have to do it. That whole we get stuff done, that's what you do. And from my perspective as an engineering officer, maybe an MSG officer, and I know that there's officer-rich career fields. Like if you're a pilot, there's 1,000 officers that are around that can show you the ropes, and your job is to fly. And then whatever additional duties, I'm not sure. I can't speak for the Space Force, but as far as engineering, there's nothing. And so you have a regulation that you have to follow, and you have mentors kind of happen by accident. I got lucky enough to, when I was a second lieutenant, I don't want to talk for too long because I'll talk forever. When I was a second lieutenant, it was easy for maybe 6 months. And all I had to do was kind of sit back in my office, and Colonel Leach was gone. Oh, I don't know if I should call her out by name, but she's retired. And there was nobody there to tell me what to do. And so all I had to do was walk into a room, and people would stop talking and say, "Can I help you, sir?" And I'd be like, "Yes, keep doing a good job," And it was so easy. And then one day, I got a phone call from the National Guard Bureau, and I was very happy on the phone, like, "Hey, how can I help you?" And they were like, "I'll tell you how you can help me. You can start doing your job." And they laid into me, telling me how awful I was, how they haven't heard from me, why haven't I submitted this paperwork, like all these, just a laundry list of things. And I'm like, I didn't know I was supposed to do that, And I was lucky enough at that time to have a senior NCO. His name was he was Senior Master Sergeant Ben Reed. He's Chief Reed now in Peoria. And he was the type of guy who followed AFIs and did the right thing no matter what the opposition was. And that ended up being my mentor. And as an officer, strangely enough, that's kind of how I molded myself into. And so as far as seeking out a mentor, there is a mentorship program. I think it's My Vector. I never did any of that. The mentors that you have are the people that you're surrounded by, and I was lucky enough to be surrounded by good people. Here, I'm lucky enough to be surrounded by a few good people, and I didn't seek out any mentors; they just happened on their own. I'm not sure if I answered your question properly.
Well, let me. Yes, you did, and let me just ask a follow-on question to that. How did your years of service, 14 years, right, enlisted service, help you when you got cut loose and you were kind of flying solo there?
I don't think it did. maybe I shouldn't say that. I knew programs. I knew that there were AFIs. I knew that there were TOs on the aircraft maintenance side. You had to follow rules. I knew that I couldn't just do whatever I wanted to do. But in OTS, they don't really teach you that stuff. In tech school, they don't really teach you that stuff. They teach you a few basic things to kick you out as a second lieutenant, and then you're on your own. And depending on who you're surrounded by is whether you sink or swim, and it's the type of officer that you choose to become. So as far as my enlisted time, it didn't. One of the biggest things, I was commissioned for 4 months, and we went on a deployment for training, or DFT. We went to Canada, and it was me, another first lieutenant, and a captain, and we all got there. And then 40 guys from CE. We were supposed to build stuff for the Canadian military. So I get off the plane, and we get to camp, and then I'm just standing around, and a whole bunch of guys start standing around me. And then they're just like all mingling, and I didn't think anything of it because I was just waiting for orders, you know?
Sure.
And then somebody, it was a senior master sergeant, came up to me and was like, "Sir, what should we do?" And I was like, Oh yeah, I'm the one that's telling you guys what to do. I didn't know, like, I had to figure it out, and that was like my first like, nobody's gonna tell you what to do. In case anybody's out there wondering, no one's gonna tell you what to do. There's no tech school isn't the same. You're not told. I mean, you have a job to do. My job, for example, is go be this civil engineer. It's so broad. There's no guide. There's no books. There's AFI guidance that you have to follow, and sometimes you don't even know that you have to follow it. Yeah, it's my enlisted, as far as being enlisted, that experience wasn't there. I was always shuffled around and told, here's your mission, go complete it, tell me when it's done. As an officer, that doesn't happen to you.
Kind of humbling.
Mm-hmm.
I like that story you tell about the senior coming up to you and saying, what do we do now? That happened to me, very small situation. We were doing a squadron breakfast, and we were just cooking, and everyone looked at me and said, what are we going to do right now? And like you said, like pilots and operations and things like that is really officer heavy. Same with the Space Force. So I wasn't used to being in a setting where I even still had to do those decisions yet, because there's so many officers around all the time. We have just a few number of enlisted, and that day they were all the ones who volunteered to help me. But I will say my mentors have always been the enlisted folks. I remember when I would go back for my drill weekend after I had been doing my ROTC things, I would talk to my, he's now a chief, Lonnie Major, and he would, kind of coach me up, because I knew my enlisted time was really minimal and I didn't have a ton to grab from. And so now I feel like, because there's so many officers around, I seek the advice of other enlisted folk around me, because I know I don't know everything and they've been around way longer and have more experience. So I think because I have all the officers to observe all the time, when I seek advice, it's usually from our enlisted force at work.
So I'm kind of a little bit of a combination of the two stories. So I was fortunate that my commander at the time, Lieutenant Colonel O'Hara, now Colonel O'Hara, was a really, really good mentor to me, and really helped kind of guide me through the process and kind of give me a peek behind the curtain of what it was going to be like after I commissioned, especially because I was commissioning into the same unit that I had left enlisted, which isn't always a very easy road. It's very confusing with relationships where, all of a sudden, I'm wearing stripes and then the next day I've got a gold bar. And, again, like, Captain Tripodi said, people are like, hey, sir, what do you want us to do? And, you don't 100% know the answer to that question. So she helped guide me through the process. But, she went up to JFHQ after. So when I came back as a second lieutenant, kind of similar to Captain Tripodi's story, normally, on the active duty side, especially in security forces, I would have came back as a second lieutenant and been a flight commander, but I was immediately, made the operations officer. So thankfully, my enlisted time helped, because I knew the career field. I knew what everyone should be doing. I knew the AFIs. I didn't really need to take a ton of time to become a technical expert, which is kind of what, company grade officers are supposed to do, become that technical, expert and that technical leader. I already had that expertise, but it was very difficult coming back as a, I left as a senior NCO, working my way up. And then I came back as a second lieutenant and I was starting all over again. So, it was difficult immediately becoming the operations officer because, for me, now I'm a second lieutenant interacting with 04s and 05s and 06s all the time and trying to figure out, how do I support my squadron the best way without stepping on my own toes here, because as a master sergeant, I had a little bit, I would say almost a little bit more of a voice because you're viewed as that person who has that, that expertise, a senior non-commissioned officer. And now you're a second lieutenant and, it gets a little bit difficult there. But as far as seeking out mentors, Captain Tripodi hit the nail on the head there. The people that are around you, I had chiefs and seniors that helped me. And now I'm fortunate enough that I have a good amount of company grade officers that I'm close with, one of them being Captain Tripodi, that have kind of walked a similar...
Thanks, buddy.
that have kind of walked a similar path that makes it easy to kind of bounce things off of, like, hey, how did you, go about this situation? Or, hey, what do you think the best way to talk to this, colonel is about this, because I really disagree, and it helps you navigate those.
Do you think having your enlisted time has helped you empathize with the enlisted troops too? I feel like I'll hear a lot of my peers say things that I'm like, why would you ever say something like that right now? But having the time and the knowledge of what it is to be enlisted, I think helps understand what other people are going through.
Absolutely, 100%. It definitely helps. And even for some of my newer senior non-commissioned officers that, are senior master sergeants, or just becoming master sergeants, having that experience and also kind of going through a similar change, of, really now being in a very, very personnel supervisory type role, it makes it easier to kind of empathize and kind of relate to them and say, hey, I've gone through a similar situation. It can be a confusing, time. Let me try to help you through it and, kind of tell you my story and see if that, if you pick up on some things along the way.
Yeah. And, the LT said something, I think commissioning into a career field that you already know would give you that extra, like, what the cops at the gate go through. What it's like to stand in the cold for 4 hours straight and check IDs with a heater that's broken, and that's the thing, like, as a aircraft maintainer in Minot, North Dakota, I know what it's like to stand outside in negative 40-degree wind chill with 45-mile-an-hour winds, and your head sock blows off your head, and you just have no hat now, So I know what it's like to work, and I know what it's like to not be the one behind the desk, and so yeah, I think it absolutely helped.
And I think that's why alluding to what Colonel Hasey had told me as a mentor back in the day. I think now I look at it and I kind of think, oh, now I know what she was talking about. Now I know why, she thought that, someone who had been enlisted could make, a significant impact on a unit. And it's exactly what you were saying, Captain Tripodi. It's you have that experience, what the enlisted force has gone through, and it helps you not lose sight of that as you progress through your officer career.
It also helps you navigate going into, so I was aircraft maintenance that went into civil engineering, and up to that point, all I knew was that if the sink was broken, I called CE, and then 3 weeks later when it wasn't fixed, I was like, what's CE do? Like, what do they even do over there? And then going from that, like, to actually being in CE and not knowing what was happening, it is very easy for people to just, when you say, hey, why is this happening? And it's very easy to come up with an excuse. And if you don't know, then you just accept that excuse. So having the enlisted experience also kind of taught you how things are supposed to work. And so it doesn't matter whether you know what you're doing or whether you don't know what you're doing. You know that there's a process, and you can kind of tell when a process isn't being followed. Colonel Carpenter, as soon as I told him that I was accepting the thing, he was like, TBV, Vinny, TBV. And I was like, what does TBV mean? And he was like, you got to go find out. And I spent like 4 days asking around and nobody knew. And then somebody was like, oh, it means trust but verify. And then I was like, trust but verify. And then I really didn't understand what that meant. Even after I commissioned and I came back, and it takes a couple of times being burned before you realize that there is a process. There's always a process, and it's your job to follow it. I don't know what that has to do with the enlisted question, but felt like I was going there.
It's good advice nonetheless.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I heard that quote as know who you need to trust, or know who you can trust, and know who you need to verify. And I think that just goes along with knowing your people and what they're good at and where they struggle. And yeah, I like that quote too.
I like that one. That's good.
Excellent. So shifting gears just a little bit, is there any information you can impart on the audience in as far as the nuts and bolts of getting a commission, like the process, either prepping for it, going through the process itself, preloading your education, making sure boxes are checked, anything at all that would help someone who's considering a commission?
Yes, I need to take this one. People often told me before I took the AFOQT, you don't need to study, that test is easy. I failed the first time I took it, and my life flashed before my eyes. I said, I don't even know everything I've been working towards. I don't know what's going to happen anymore. Please, please, please study for the AFOQT. Work hard at it. If you're not good at math, like I'm not, work at that, 45 minutes a day or whatever you can spare. Just work towards that AFOQT.
I can completely back that one up because I am not good at math whatsoever. And I studied a lot to be able to pass the AFOQT, and it is still narrowly scraped by. There's so many resources available. The books are on Amazon, and they're cheap. They're like $10, and you get a bunch of quizzes that you can take. And the biggest thing for me with those is, the questions aren't the same, right? They're similar, but what they did for me is when I went to go take the AFOQT and they give you the crazy timelines that they give you, like, hey, there's 100 questions and you have 5 minutes to answer as many as you can, you're not shocked by it at all. So if you've done the practice with some of the books, you don't have any of that kind of shell shock of how am I going to do this, where you lose, 30 seconds in your own head. You're prepared for it. You're ready to go. And yeah, I completely agree. Like, there's so many resources available. Study for it because it is a difficult test.
And I just want to give a third plug as a person with an engineering degree who's wicked good at math. Like I did 4 semesters of calculus, thermodynamic. Like I've done all the math, like fluid dynamics. It's not this. It's trick math. It's like SAT math, where they ask you the questions that you can make really hard or you can make really easy if you know the tricks. That's me too. Just because if you think that you have a degree in literature and so you don't need to study for the English part, you better study for the English part. And I'm also going to say, don't just buy one book. You got to get like 4 or 5. Some books are good in one area. Some books are good in another area. And if you want to do overall good, then that's what you need to do. Also, keep in mind, your career field that you want to go into has minimum. You need to be competitive. So, like as an engineer, obviously you need math and science, and so you need to have your math and science scores be high. But the rest of them don't really. Like I didn't need my pilot scores to be high because I'm not going to be a pilot.
Yeah, I was doodling on that section because I thought, what, I am tapped out from the math and the English. I don't want to be a pilot. I don't have the eyes for it. I'm just going to take a break.
I looked at those ones and I was like, oh, these schematics are interesting.
Like, obviously up and to the left.
That's great. So I think we covered some of the challenges, but as a new officer, what are some of the challenges? And I think Captain Tripodi, you mentioned a few, but have any of you had any significant challenges that you're like, what, it'll pass, time will pass, but anything that you've run across that's been a hurdle?
So I think one of the significant challenges that I faced, and I alluded to it a little bit, is, you come back, you go to TFOT, you get trained, everything goes great, and you come back and you're ready to hit the ground running. Like you're 100% ready to
You're blued.
You're blued. You're ready to be the greatest officer the Air Force or the Space Force has ever developed. Like you're 100% ready. And it's hard to kind of take that step back when you get back, and it's like, slow your roll, second lieutenant. You need to learn what it is to be a company grade officer. You're not immediately just a colonel or a general, and you can change the entire Air Force. You kind of have to take a slice of that humble pie. And that's not always easy, especially, it wasn't easy for me because I had made my way through the enlisted force by being a hard charger. So it was difficult to kind of like hit that wall and say, okay, let's slowly roll. Let's, learn some things. Let's learn how to be an officer. Like you might have the technical expertise, but you need to learn how to be an officer. And I didn't really understand what that meant when I would get told it as a brand new second lieutenant. And I've kind of, come to understand it of, understanding, the things that you need to do as an officer, understanding that it's not about you doing all the work. It's about developing other people and really learning what it is to be a leader and try and help develop and mentor those folks underneath you. So I think that was one of those things that was a challenge when I came back because, it's not like it's written in black and white. And anyone that is, looking to go down that commissioning path, you'll learn that we spend a lot of time in the Air Force, which we should. It's great. Spend a lot of time making sure that the enlisted force has very good goals, kind of career paths, making sure that, we really define mentorship, we really define leadership. When you cross over into the officer ranks, there's less of that. It's more like Captain Tripodi had alluded to. It's more open-ended. It's really, a choose your own adventure book kind of. Okay. So that can be difficult when you're used to going from something that's so structured to something that is still structured, but not as black and white.
The choose your own adventure is huge because I spend so much time of my day trying to figure out what I'm going to do. What's important? What's my biggest priority to accomplish right now? I might feel that way because I capped out as a senior airman, and really my most responsibility was go train so-and-so how to drive a truck kind of thing. But just picking out the priorities and where you need to spend your time, and also prioritizing time to walk around and observe. You can't just sit there all day and go task, 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 because I feel like once you're an officer, maybe not so much in the lower ranks, but you have transitioned from being the ones answering the questions to asking questions. So you have to be able to take a step back, and I still struggle with this every day, but be the person who answers that why. Why are we doing something? What's the point of doing this? And then putting that into the work. You can't just be so task saturated all the time that you don't take the time to step back and take time to think about what's going on, and also what's going on with the people around you and who needs to be taken care of. You really, the choose your own adventure is super relatable because you're really figuring out where your values are, not having someone figure that out for you.
Right.
In OTS, they spend a class. Maybe you get, I'm going to say 2 hours tops. And they come in and they make you act it out. They give you a little scenario and they say, you're the commander of a squadron. And somebody walks in who you haven't seen in 2 weeks. And they come in and they tell you, blah, 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 blah. And you do your 2 hour class, and then you're a leader now, So one challenge is that's not enough. Someone's gonna come into your office with a real problem. It's like someone's gonna be involved in a homicide, maybe. Someone's gonna be involved. There are real things that are gonna happen to you, and you're gonna have absolutely no idea how to deal with them. There's also going to be people who come into your office and they're like, this person has MSNBC on TV and I want them to watch Fox News. And you're like, all right, well, what are you doing in my, like there's all those things are real things that you have to deal with. And you're just never going to, you can't prepare for it in OTS. You're going to go in cold, period.
And that's why I think it's so important to really, like, once you commission, or even before, if you have those good mentors or those good, people that you can reach out to run, obviously not releasing PII or any specifics of things, but, to be able to have those hypotheticals like, hey, if you had this happen to you, do you have any advice on how you would handle it? Because if you try to handle those situations alone in a vacuum, it's really, really difficult. And I speak that from experience, right? Like you come back as a second lieutenant and you want to be able to have the right answer to everything because you feel as though internally that's how you should be. You're like, oh, I'm an officer. I should have the answer for everything. I should be able to give direction, to the enlisted force with no problem. Like that's what they pay me for, and that's what they train me to do.
That's what they teach you. That's what they teach you you're supposed to do. You solve problems, period. And so you go in with that mindset.
Yeah.
I'm going to say one more big problem that I had was that I was enlisted for a wicked long time, and I had a whole lot of friends. And some of those friends outranked me when I was enlisted. Some of them were chiefs. And then when you come back, you're a second lieutenant, and your friends still want to be your friend, and that may or may not be good for you. They'll call, I had senior airmen calling me Vinny in front of my new squadron where I was a second lieutenant, where I was supposed to be in charge. And then when you correct them, it's not met with, oh, sorry, sir. It's met with, what are you talking about? I had chiefs who would deliberately do the opposite of what you said because they're not listening to this dummy who's now a second lieutenant, people who walk by and refuse to salute, like it happens, because they knew
absolutely.
you as an enlisted person. And those are issues that they don't cover in OTS. That's just you're a human being, and you got to use your experience as a human being to deal with those things. And that's where it goes back to your mentors again. You get yourself, you got to find your core of people. Most likely, I think they're going to be enlisted people. Unless you are in an officer saturated environment, your mentor is going to be a good senior NCO who you trust, and that's going to be your person that you bounce everything off of. But that's where that comes in. Those are issues also that I dealt with, at least for a little while. Now I'm at a new base. It didn't happen so much, and I'm a little bit, I got 8 years as an officer, give or take, 7 years and 10 months or so, and so I don't really run into too much of that anymore.
Well, I don't imagine as a second lieutenant and that's happening. It's a time in your career when you're trying to establish yourself as an officer and the authority that comes with being an officer, and you've got that to deal with. It just makes it twice as hard.
Mm-hmm.
It makes it twice as hard, and it's difficult as well because you don't want anyone to look at you that way, right? Like I would hear sometimes, well, that doesn't sound like a Master Sergeant Nancarrow decision, or that doesn't sound like something Master Sergeant Nancarrow would say, and it's tough because you have to kind of say, I'm not Master Sergeant Nancarrow anymore. I'm Lieutenant Nancarrow now. I'm still Alan Nancarrow, but I am in a completely different, I'm an officer now as opposed to being enlisted, and there are differences between them. It doesn't just, it doesn't just continue on. There's a cut and then a start over, and it's tough because you don't want people to, think you're a jerk or think that you're a bad leader, because there are people out there that think, you have to be there. There are some people who think that being friends with everybody is the most effective way to lead people, and there's a lot of people that will tell you that that's not 100%. It's not so black and white. It's very gray.
I had guys that I worked with for years. We got deployed together. We went TDY together. We drank together. We laughed so hard together. And then when I got back and I went to CE, they thought that they could say, "Hey, I know a guy in CE now." And when I told them no, they made a scene about it almost. I'm going to say that like they found me having a drink with my wife at the base club, and they made a scene. Like, how could you not do this? And just like you can't do that to me now. I'm a lieutenant, and I'm not in that capacity anymore, and that's those are problems that they don't even warn you about those problems in OTS.
I'd say, from the sounds of it, and just from personal observation over the years, that's probably one of the bigger challenges that is more of an intangible challenge that people don't think about immediately, is this could forever affect friendships, long-term friendships, people that you've gone to war with, quote unquote. And that's something that, I'm sure a lot of folks don't think about when they start on this process, and how important are those relationships to you, because they could be forever affected.
Absolutely.
So the next, we're starting to wrap it up here, but what I want to ask next is, what advice would you have for an enlisted person looking to make the move? What are some of the things you wish you had known before you started your own journeys?
So I think so I wrote it down here because it's one of the things that got said to me when I came back as a second lieutenant, and I really took it to heart. Don't be an enlisted officer. And the way that was described to me is, like I said, with my background, I was a master sergeant. I was a program manager. I was used to doing I was used to being the go-to person, right? Hey, we need this done. Yep. Roger that, chief. Roger that, sir, ma'am. Got it. I'm going to take care of it. You still get that as an officer, but just because it's assigned to you doesn't mean that you need to do it. And it's not that you don't want to do the task that's given. You might have the ability to do it, but you're not leading people if you just do everything yourself. So, and you're not building that camaraderie unless you go to, that NCO or that senior NCO and you tell them, hey, I've got a task from Colonel so-and-so. I'd like to work this project with you. And when you set those meetings up, you set those milestones, you give them that guidance. Look at this AFI, look at this. And you take that product that you get, and maybe it's not how you would do it, but you take it and you look at it, and maybe you'll go back to the drawing board and say, hey, there's a few things here that we do really need to correct. But just because it's not done the way that you would do it, if it's still done, to the Air Force standard and it's still meeting the objective, you've got to let the people underneath you do that, and you've got to give them the guidance to do it. Because if you just do everything, then you're not helping anybody, and you're not helping them learn.
You're not in a vacuum,
right?
You got to spread the wealth. You got to share the task.
Mm-hmm. If you do all the work, who are you going to write the award for?
Good point. Myself.
As far as advice, there's a lot. You can't really sum up. There's pros and cons to be an officer, and you can't really sum up. Over the years, you take in so much. I guess it would be to be prepared to work, and work hard, and study things. Even if you're not interested in them, you need to know about what you're talking about before you confront somebody. You need to have all of your ducks in a row, and you don't know what those ducks. I'm trying to put this together. Like I said, I didn't practice this, but you don't know what you don't know, and so before you make a decision, you have to seek out all this information. And I don't even know how to practice that.
Just have to practice being informed.
I guess but you don't even know how much. I'll give an example. When we went to OTS, they don't give you coffee, and you sit in this classroom for hours, and you're tired. And there's no coffee. And then one day I saw somebody with coffee, and I was like, how did you get coffee? And they were like, I don't know, we asked for coffee and we got it. So I was like, oh, well, I'll just ask for coffee. So I was like, who was my captain? I don't remember her name, but we said, hey, can we have coffee? And she was like, no, you got to write a memo. You got to write a memo, a memorandum.
Justify it.
You got to justify your coffee. And we were like, what? And so we wrote a memo, and we said, that's fine. We're techs and master sergeants. We know how to write memos, so we write this memo, and it wasn't, and it didn't meet the requirements of the tongue and quill for a memo. And we were like, what is the tongue and quill? And they were like, oh, that's a book that tells you how you're supposed to write memos. And we were like, you don't even know that that's even a thing. And also, like they made you a flight commander, and you have responsibilities, and then one day you're just getting yelled at because you didn't do your responsibilities. And you're like, what responsibilities? And they're like, well, did you go on Blackboard and look in the flight commander folder and see all the things that you were supposed to do? You're supposed to write daily reports. You're supposed to do X, Y, and Z. And it's like, nobody told me. And they're like, why should we tell you? You're an officer now. And so you just, like, you have to practice finding out what you're supposed to do that day. And then
The choose your own adventure book.
yeah, it is. That's that choose. Like, you have to practice however you can, deciding what it is that needs to happen, and then making that happen, I guess.
So, and that really goes back to the whole, it goes back to mentorships and relationships. I mean, there's been plenty of times where I've talked with Captain Tripodi and I've said, hey, have you ever done this before? Or have you ever, spoken about this subject or whatnot? And, sometimes it's, oh yeah, I have, look at A, B, C, D, or E. And other times it's like, no, I haven't, but you know what? I might know someone that has. And it's, it's building those relationships because, I think at the core, no matter what, right, every officer wants to do the right thing for their airmen and for the force in general. But it's a matter of trying to get the force to understand that, just because they're like, hey, someone did this that was, not fair to us. And you're like, you're right. I'm going to go talk to their commander. I'm going to go to talk to their flight commander. You still have to arm yourself for that conversation. Yeah. Every single conversation that, every professional conversation that you have as an officer, you should be educated and kind of know, you got to ask yourself, okay, what questions might they ask and how can I make sure I'm educated? Because the more educated and prepared, the more informed you are and the more receptive people are going to be to that conversation. If you can answer every single question that they have, then you're showing that you're that prepared officer. And they're going to say, okay, well, you answered all of my questions. So yeah, you're right. We're going to give you that money for, that special project. Or you're right. We're going to make sure that, our airmen don't treat your airmen that way because we admit that we were doing the wrong thing.
There are really, there are some really sharp people out there that don't know. You think, for example, I have an engineering degree, so I might think maybe I know a thing or two about engineering. And that maybe I know more about building construction than some random person who works at JFHQ or whatever. And then I've been surprised, I don't know how many times, by a person who has absolutely no engineering experience but has a lot of officer experience. And they know what questions, they'll ask very pointed questions that you just didn't think of. No matter how professional, no matter how much you know about your particular subject, you need to know. You need to just be prepared, just like LT said.
It's kind of like being prepared to be unprepared about something.
Yes.
I when you were mentioning your story a minute ago, I had this vision of Men in Black, the movie Men in Black, and all the officers, all these Olympians, and all these highly qualified officers are sitting in a room, and here comes Will Smith, and everybody's they're struggling with writing on their papers, and Will Smith just walks over and drags the heaviest table you've ever seen over to his chair so that he can write on the table.
Oh, yeah. And
that, being prepared to be unprepared. He was unprepared, but he made the most of it, having the skills to be able to adapt to the environment and the scenario.
I have two pieces of advice. We've kind of spoken about it inadvertently. I would say to work on your communication skills and all communication skills. Writing, reading, speaking. My undergrad was in communication, and now I'm working on my master's degree as well. And I like to journal. So I am constantly trying to better how I write, because we write emails all the time and we write those memos. And if you are a more persuasive person from it, you are able to get things done, not only for your own objectives, but for the people you're leading too. So if you can practice those skills before you need them, I would do that. The second piece of advice I have is to be ready to find the smartest person in the room and go talk to them. right now, I said that I had a communication degree, and now I am in a very technical career field where I am learning, the ins and out of how a phased array radar works. And if you told me that in college when I got space as my assignment, I did. I cried because I was so nervous about having to do something that I had no skills for. But if you can bring a different side of expertise into things, you're going to excel. But going back to finding the smartest person, if you can learn from them and learn to soak up as much experience and knowledge that they have, you are basically learning from failures and experiences without having to experience them yourself. So 2 pieces: work on the communication skills, and then find and look for the people in the room who are extremely smart.
And that reminded me of something. Another thing is, don't you ever think that you are the smartest person in the room. Like, even if you are, don't you ever, ever, ever come across like you are the one who's the smartest. Don't. Nobody will work for you.
No, they won't, and they won't want to work with you. It doesn't matter how good you are at something. You're not going to get anything done because you need people to get things done, and no one will want to work with you.
Absolutely.
Your job is to lead, but you can't lead if you don't have any followers.
Absolutely, 100%.
That's great advice.
Mm-hmm.
So, wrapping it up, is there anything additional you'd like to throw out there?
So I think we talked a lot about the pitfalls and things that you can fall into as an officer, but I just kind of want to wrap up and say, at the end of the day, I'm happy that I made the decision that I did. I'm proud to be an Air Force officer. It's given me experiences that going into my military career, I never would have thought that I'd have the opportunity to. And things that I wouldn't have, if you told me when I was enlisted, like, hey, you're going to consider getting this position description classified as like a big win. Like, I'd be like, that's really lame. Like, that's not cool at all. That's, but those things now, like, they are huge wins to me because they affect the force that I lead. They give better quality of life, to my airmen. Like, they are things that I am so proud of, and they're experiences that I might not have gotten if I didn't make the jump to being an officer. So, again, I think we talked a lot about, some of the pitfalls and things like that, but at the end of the day, I'm happy that I made the decision that I did, and it is worthwhile. It's worth it.
Yeah, I agree with that one too. When I joined the military, I joined in 2002. And when I joined, I was just like, maybe I'll be a mechanic. And, thinking back to that person, I wasn't much different from that when I commissioned. And then since I commissioned, the level of drive and the level of work, I don't know how to, like, it changes you as a human being. I can't say that it will. It changed me as a human being, I guess I should say. But it one of the best decisions I've ever made in my life was to actually make the jump and become an officer. Even with all the problems, unknown problems that nobody thinks of. Even with all of that, I would absolutely, if I had to go back. Sometimes I just kick myself. When I was 18, I wish I would have just gone to college and just commissioned straight out. The things that you're a part of, you watch the news sometimes, and you see things on the news that you actually had a hand in. Not all the time, but, during COVID, you go and you do things, and then when the governor gets on TV, they're bragging about stuff that you did. Like you were the one that made that happen. You were the brains behind the operation, and your people. It makes you feel good to be able to tell your people how good they like that. It was great. It's great. I like it.
I would have to say that I have fallen into the trap of an officer as, I see someone who's really good, and I'm like, I'm going to be just like them. That doesn't always work. You can take bits and pieces from people, but you really have to figure out who you are first, because if you're trying to be someone else and follow their path to success, that's not going to work for you, and you're going to come across as disingenuine. So figure out who you are, what works for you, and be the best leader that person is. I really love public speaking and getting up in front of people, but if that's not you, don't force yourself into that, because it might come across as a little strange. Again, work on those skills, because you will be forced to do it, but be the best leader with the skills that you already have, and just make those better.
That's
but
fantastic.
Yeah, I'm with everyone. That I definitely think this was a great decision. I love what I do every day.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, with that, we're going to wrap this up. I want to thank each of you for coming on the panel and imparting your advice and your knowledge and your experiences with the audience. It's been great having you. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And to the audience, thanks for joining us here on Chevrons, and we will be back next month with a whole new episode.